Hello, everyone. Welcome on this new episode of Education Futures. Today I am with Gregoire Borst, who is a neuroscientist, a professor, and I'm very happy to have you on the podcast, Gregoire. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
I'm very excited about this conversation because we're going to talk about the brain. We're going to talk about the future of education at the age of AI. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts, Grégoire. So maybe you can start very quickly by introducing yourself. What do you do? Where do you work? What do you research on?
Okay, so I'm a professor of developmental cognitive neuroscience. So I'm doing basically essentially fundamental research on how the brain develops. What are the mechanisms that support learning in both children and adolescents? So combining different type of approach, going from behavioral data, but also collecting genetic and brain imaging data, including in very young children. So that's more my fundamental part of my research. Like the applied part of my research is essentially at the moment on two big avenues of research. One on the question of educational inequalities. And so I'm trying to find ways to train teachers to teach a bit differently, essentially in preschool, because there is already huge inequalities in preschools. And so I'm trying to see which intervention or which professional development teacher might need to teach a bit differently, including explaining the brain to their students in such a way that they can actually form different representation of intelligence and learning. So we've been doing that for the last 5 years and starting to scale up a bit those interventions. And I'm doing another one that is closely related to the type of question we're gonna, or the topics we're gonna discuss, which is about basically how can we foster brains, adolescent brains that are more resilient to fake news, essentially, and to the type of precisely fake news that AI can contribute to. So that's my second avenue of research, basically.
Fascinating, fascinating. We're going to talk about all of this. My first question is around the impact that AI has on our brains, on our kids' brains. And I would love to know, do we have, do we already have any perspective on the impact that frequent use of AI has on young people's brain? I know that science is not moving as fast as the developments in AI, but what do we know about its impact on our brains?
Well, we don't know much, which is, of course, frustrating, but that's the reality of science. So if you want to know what AI might, the effect of AI on our brain and our brain development, by definition, you need to follow longitudinally large cohorts of kids with different level of exposure. And that's also the problem with those digital tools, is that we are all exposed to them. So it's very complex because you don't have like a specific part of the population that might not be exposed at all, which would be a great control to see how those basically tools affect basically our brain and our cognitive development. So as for now, we have no data whatsoever. Even for, I mean, we could think, well, we should have data on social media. Well, even on
Mm.
social media, it's not that's the data are not that great actually. If you look at those data, um, they're essentially correlational. They don't really find causality because it's super complex to provide causality in a world where everyone is exposed basically. So you need to look at the degree at which the dose effect basically. Um,
Mm.
and in order to do that, you need to have very large basically samples. And essentially also because like brain imaging is great, but the signal is not that great actually. There's a lot of measurement errors, so you do need like very large amount of data to have like something that is meaningful in that respect. So it's purely speculative at this point. We really don't know what could be basically happening in our brain. The second thing is it depends of how you use those tools. I mean, those are just tools, and you can
Mm.
use them for the best or for the worst. You can use it in a very different way with a lot of critical thinking about it, or I mean, a lot of distance basically, or you can use it like as a fool, and that will produce, of course, different effects on your brain and on your cognitive development. So, long story short, we don't know yet.
We don't know yet, and we might never really know because we are not capable, from what I understand, we're not capable of putting aside a cohort of young people who will never or who have never had access to it because
Yeah,
everyone has AI in their pockets right now, right?
sure.
So it's really, I mean, that's something that worries me a lot because any we don't have any idea of what's really happening to our brains, and should we let kids, should we let adolescents use AI as they use it right now? We know that most of the users of ChatGPT are below a certain age. I don't remember exactly the age, but it's like very young people, and so it poses really the question of critical thinking because if you use AI every day and if you believe everything it tells you, there is a real worry around critical thinking, which is the top one of the top skills. I don't know what you think about it, but one of the top skills that young people should learn in school.
No, I think I mean you put it in perspective. The key element, as far as I can tell, is how we can foster basically resilient brains that can like basically exert critical thinking about AI. It's not the idea of not using AI because I mean it's also we need to be a little bit strategic here. So we're in an educational system where you're gonna have like basically those children will become adults, and in the workplace we do need to use AI, or we are forced to use AI. You just put it the way you want. But so I think the critical idea is like how do we make sure that those children that will become eventually adults in the workplace might be using AI with enough basically critical thinking that they can really find ways to use it for what they could be providing. And again, I mean, ChatGPT is like providing some great basically advance, for instance, for doing very automatic tasks. So if I'm doing like programming for my experiment, I mean, that's great. The first 100 lines of my code, ChatGPT can do very well. But if I'm asking questions that are more tricky, where there is more ambiguity, then ChatGPT is really, I mean, sucks basically because it's just a statistical learning system of words that have more or less probability to be associated together. So of course, like it's gonna produce very dumb answer to some complex issues. So that's what we need to for the kids to understand. Not that it's not, I mean, that it couldn't be used, but that it's just a tool. I mean, so if you understand the limitation of a tool, then you can use it in a pertinent and intelligent way. And I think that's the critical issue that we have at the moment, is
Uh,
that they're using ChatGPT a bit like, for instance, as what Google could produce, which is, I mean, there is really two different tools that really not going to provide the same type of answers because they don't work in the same way.
yeah.
So I think if you're a student, that's what you should start to learn basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right now, it's just a tool, but who knows how it will develop, right? And that's also the big question of this podcast is if we have to imagine the education system or the future of schools, the future of education altogether in 20, 30 years with these very rapid advancements of AI, like what should it look like? How can we prepare for it now? And what should we change? So, what would be your advice to policymakers around the world who want to prepare the next 20 years? What should they focus on? What should they put on the curricula? Like what's your advice?
Well, my advice is at least to engage in the conversation and not just shy away from that conversation, because it's true from AI, but it's true from any other big technological advancement where when you look at our educational system, I can talk essentially about the French one, but the French one is a bit like, in a sense, it didn't really engage in that conversation. So it's still really about the fundamentals, and I'm not like disputing the fact that learning to read, learning to do math is super important, but it's just necessary but not sufficient, basically, for educational school systems. So we do need to, like, collectively think about what do we need as a society? What are the key, basically, competencies that we want the next generation to have to basically flourish as human being in this new world where AI might be a key player. And I think if we have this conversation, I mean, there's something we already touch upon, like the question of critical thinking is like decisive. I mean, we do need to have like basically the next generation to be able to question basically those tools, how they can really find ways to also fine tune those new tools. Because again, AI is produced by human intelligence, so it's all about like the people who are actually programming those AI. So you can also think about if we have a next generation who might be questioning the type of AI we develop, maybe we can have the AI that might be developing in a more fruitful way for humanity as a whole. And the second thing is what's strikes me is that everything converge now in the sense that because AI is really good at doing some stuff that human are good at, but not that good. Maybe what is key, basically, in this new world is to have an educational system that actually foster skills that are not replaceable by AI. And I think that's a key question we should all have. Is that we're not going to compete against an AI if you think about like averaging super large amount of data in a very objective way. I mean, AI is going to be better than us to do that. But like in other types of areas, I mean, what makes us human is our emotions, our ability to make social connection, our ability to think creatively, our ability to exert critical thinking. And so that's what educational systems should cultivate, basically, to make sure that in 20 years from now, those adults might be able to exert those type of skills. And interestingly, even in private companies, the private sectors start to say, oh, what we want is for the next basically workers to be able to basically communicate well, make interesting social interactions. So it's also sound, terms. If you feel that the educational system should be about like basically human capital, you should also go toward those type of skills. I mean, I'm more into like the flourishing part, UNESCO kind of way of thinking about education, but still, both are basically claiming that what we do need to have is 21st century skill, which is all about social emotional skills. And I think this will be what will not be replaceable by AI.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we think about the use of AI nowadays by youngsters, adolescents, and students, we see that many of them, criticize the current system because it's not adapting as fast as their usage of AI. And I have a question around memorization because, in an area where we can ask AI any question instantly and get the answer instantly, what role does memorization play? Because, some believe that we won't need to memorize anything anymore because of AI. Do you agree, or do you think that belief is flawed in some ways?
No, it's completely flawed. I mean, like, first of all, because like we spend our time memorizing information because we don't spend all our life on AI related tools or on digital tools. I mean, like we spend part of our life in real world where we need to memorize information and so forth and so on. And even the type of information we're exposed to on the social media, we still memorize some of it. So I don't think like memorization will disappear. Might be adapting a bit. So I think that's true before AI. Like the fact that you know where to find the information might create different type of basically memory, different uh, type of information you're going to memorize. You might not memorize the information, but maybe the way to find the information, which is still memorization. And the last thing is also the conversation that we need to engage with the adolescent is to say, well, look, guys, I mean, if we try to argue with them that they need to memorize information because they might not have basically a screen to look for the information, that's completely flawed. Like, you're never going to convince them from that. Now you can be in the middle of the desert and you can still have access to any kind of information. But like engaging conversation with them, understanding that, well, I do need to have some basically knowledge because that's the only way to exert critical thinking. If I have no knowledge, there is no way to exert critical thinking and to be able to assess the veracity of the information. And that's key, I think, is to like let them, we convince them that, well, look, I mean, if you want to be able to precisely gain more knowledge by going on those media or using AI, you need to have a strong, basically, basis of knowledge that you're sure are actually facts and not just opinions or
Mhm.
beliefs. And that's, I mean, there's the only place where we can have those facts is basically the educational system. So it's also a great way to convince them that school is still needed because that's the only place where we are sure, or we at least we have like a, a number of ways to make sure that basically what you're going to learn are facts, and based on those facts, you can exert critical thinking. Because if you exert critical thinking on beliefs or opinions, then you're doomed to fail to basically assess the quality of the information you're exposed to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we continue on, our brain capabilities, do you think learning how to learn is still important now? And will it remain so if in the future access to information again is ubiquitous through AI? Why do you think so?
Well, I think, I mean, it's probably even more needed than before because, like, I mean, our economic systems are basically changing at a very rapid pace now, and I mean, as opposed to what was the case 20 or 30 years ago, you might still be in the same job for 30 or 40 years. It's not going to be the case anymore. So, the critical your ability to be able to adapt very quickly, your ability to precisely learn new skills over the years and through life will be a very important skill, basically, that you will have basically to master. So I think learning to learn is even more critical than before, and even more so because AI just give you access to facts, basically, or to beliefs or opinions, and it doesn't necessarily will provide like learning tools by itself. I mean, it could be used as, but it's not sufficient, basically. And so learning, mastering basically the strategies that are the most suited for learning is actually a key element that our educational system should directly and very explicitly learn to the students. And I'm surprised that it's not the case. I mean, like, the thing that we never kind of learn in our educational system is how to learn, which is kind of a
The
little bit
basic, the
surprising,
basics.
ironic to a certain extent. Like,
Yes.
I mean, if you feel that if you construct like an educational system in the right way, you would first like basically teach very explicitly how to learn. So explain how memory works, explain how attention works, basically explicit the strategy that work best in one context or the other, and then go to basically acquire this super complex cultural tool. But we do the other way around. So you're basically directly, in a sense, projected in acquiring cultural tool without any idea about how to best basically learn and acquire this tool. So I think it was the case 30 years before, and it will still be the case 30 years from now.
Mm.
So it's still like, I mean, this is basically what also produced some of the inequalities, and most of the inequalities that we see is that in some families, actually, the people are able to transmit those skills, and in others, by definition, because you didn't go to university or you didn't like do very long studies, uh, that will be basically the skills you want to acquire, and that will play out throughout your whole schooling years.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you know the work of Barbara Oakley? And she writes a lot of books for adolescents and for young students to teach them how to learn. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've come across her work, and I've read her books, and I think what she does is so important. But again, it's not taught officially in
Yeah.
schools across the U.S. She's from the U.S. And again, if you have a if you have parents who believe it's important and who buy you these types of books or courses, that's great. What about the rest? So yeah, we really need to implement these courses and teach these skills inside the education system, definitely. And also, it's not just about kids and students and young adults. It's also about all of us. Like, all of us will have to continuously learn through
Yeah.
our lives, because right now we already see the impact on AI on the job market.
Yeah.
And we see that adults will have to continuously learn. So, what if you had maybe 3 tips for our audience, of 3 tips to learn how to learn when you're an adult, to never stop learning? What would those tips be?
Well, the first tip might be obvious, is like finding the motivation to learn. I mean, everything starts with motivation. So, what will be your motivation to engage in the process of learning? Because the process of learning, and that's something we need to make very clear, it's super costly. I mean, like, you need to engage a lot of resources. I mean, it's intellectual, cognitive resources, social, emotional resources, but learning comes with a cost, basically. So the whole idea of motivation is to basically understanding that, well, you need to find ways to find basically rewards associated with the learning process you're engaged in. If there is no reward, I mean, no way you're going to go for it. So find your reward. I mean, it could be just for the sake of learning. It could be because other people might be basically benefiting from the learning you're engaged in, but find your own reward, basically. I think that's the first basically tip I will give to anyone who wants to engage in learning. The second one is, don't compare to others. I mean, that's critical, because we always do this kind of, it's a super strong bias.
Yeah.
We look at other people and we feel, oh, we're not as good as they are. Well, but do you know how long they train, for instance? I mean, like, if you don't know that, I mean, there is no way that you compare yourself with someone who's been like training for 10 years in that specific field. Like, wait for it. Like, just compare to yourself. So if I comparing myself to me, I mean, that's way easier. I can see that I'm actually gaining some new skills, and so forth and so on. So I think that's the critical thing, is always compare to yourself, to your own, what you were able to do before and what you're able to do now. And if you can look at your own learning curve, then it might actually motivate you to go a step further. And I think the last thing is to understand that, I mean, we always think about learning in a situation that is really kind of inherited from school. So we feel that learning is about like doing intellectual things. But learning is an everyday process. Every time we go out, every time we do something, every time we repeat something, I mean, we're in a learning process. So we spend our time basically learning. And because we spend our time learning, our brain are always evolving, always changing. And that's also something, it's a key basically to engage in learning, in like having and being truly convinced that we can always progress. And that's the beauty of our brain. No matter the age, we can always, the brain is changing at a very fast, basically, pace. And every time we gaining a bit of a skill or we're progressing a bit, there's a change in our brain. So no need to think that we cannot do it. We can always like at least engage in the process.
So there's no age to learn. You can learn at
No,
any age.
no, there is no age to learn. Well, we need to invest a bit more resources. That's the beauty of basically childhood and adolescence, is that our brain are super plastic. So we need to invest a bit less and we gain more. So that's great. So this is, you get more money for what you invest, but you can still do that throughout your life. And actually you can see it. Like, there is older people that really engage in the learning process and gain new skills, new abilities, new competencies. So like,
Mm.
let's make sure that we always remember that the learning process is like it's a lifelong process, basically.
Absolutely. Is it true that learning through your life can also strengthen your brain, which is like a muscle, and that might avoid some diseases like Alzheimer's? Is that true? That the more we learn, the less we are faced with the possibility of getting those?
Well, the more we engage in cognitive and social emotional abilities and basically activities, the more, I mean, the more it prevent basically those type of neurodegenerative diseases. So, I mean, it's also a key for our mental health basically and our physical health.
So that's another great argument. That's yeah, that's an excellent one. And okay, let's go back to AI. I'm fascinated about the learning how to learn topic, and I've been following your work very closely. So I have tons of questions on that part. But we really want to also explore how AI is going to change things in our education systems. And so, do you have any advice on I don't know, an age limit for children to use AI tools, about what risks or benefits do you see for their development as children? Do you have any advice for parents who are listening to this podcast?
Well, I think parents need to. I mean, I'm always struggling with the age limit for several reasons. I mean, we have like this conversation at the moment in France about social media, whether we should ban them until 15 years of age. I mean, it's always difficult for me to take a stand on that because first of all, you need to have the tool to verify the age of the child. So okay, well, no problem. We can have like a ban, but like first of all, we need to have a tool that really will make sure we know the age of the user. Once we have that, then I think we can open the discussion about banning or not banning social media and
Absolutely.
AI. For AI, I will say that for the parents is to remember that this is a tool. So for any given tool in real life, you didn't give like the first time that your children has been using a knife, the most like a very sharp knife. You use like those knives that are not too sharp and so forth and so on. Well, it's the same thing for AI. Like you're not going to give ChatGPT to your kids when it's the first time they encounter any kind of digital tool. So I think it's really an educational problem. So how can they use those tools and having using those tools with in relation to the competencies they built over time? So I'm not sure about the age, but what I do know is that we shouldn't let them use AI in a way or before they have enough knowledge so they can really assess what the AI is producing. Because I think, I mean, most of the data that we have is not that, for instance, ChatGPT is bad for learning, but it's just that if you have enough knowledge, then you can use it in a kind of more intelligent way than if you have no knowledge. And it's been also replicated with people who have no knowledge and use ChatGPT actually will create more burden on their learning than if you after you use ChatGPT after having the knowledge that is needed to evaluate the response made by ChatGPT. So I think the key idea is like how we can view this issue with a kind of a progressive lens where you need to acquire certain competencies before you're using any kind of digital tool, and more like even more so when we talk about AI, because the issue is with AI is can blur basically the difference between beliefs and facts. And I think that's one of the critical issues, is because it can create basically anything.
Absolutely.
That is also the important way of looking at it, is to say, well, do we have like brain that are resilient enough so that they can really make the difference between the two? And it's not to say that children cannot do that. They're super good at differentiating between what is real life, what is not real life. But still, I mean, with AI is even more complex than for other types of materials, for instance.
Absolutely. Um, Thank you. And if we go on a more speculative level, I know it's tough for a researcher to go on that level, but if we imagine 20 years ahead, how will students' brains evolve, if we assume that AI is heavily integrated in education and it's a reality, a day-to-day reality for most students, do you have any idea of how the brains could evolve?
Well, maybe one preliminary comment is that let's dissociate two different things. I mean, our brain are shaped by the environment, and I mean, school is a very strong environment shaping our brains. So it might have an effect, depending on what we choose for AI and the place it has in our educational system. But if we decided that it has a very limited, narrow places, then it will have literally no effect whatsoever in our brain. Uh, let's also remind ourselves that the biological time is not the cultural time. So our brain will still be basically shaped in the same way when we basically when we are born. Then it's the environment that will change that, but it will still be a brain bit or more the same brain as the one our ancestor had 15,000 years ago. So that's the reality of the biological time, basically. So, but having said that, I think we need to make sure that we think ahead in such a way that we continue to, we keep in mind that learning is a fundamental social process. So the whole idea that each and every kid will be on their own computer with their own AI bot, teaching them like basically those critical skills that we thought are the one needed to strive and to survive in our world, won't happen if it's not a social interact. It doesn't like it's not like within social interactions. So my bet is that given the time that our educational system takes to really change, I think 20 years from now we'll still be in basically the same place as we are now. There will be no like there will be tools that are assisted by AI. That's I think will probably be the case, essentially to do individualized learning, but I still think we need to be a bit careful with that. It's great for one specific students have one specific difficulty, but school and more generally learnings should still be a social process. And if it still be a social process, then we will be in a good place, basically.
When you say it's a social process, do you mean that we can't learn on our own without any sort of interactions with the teacher or with fellow students? I mean, it's.
Well, I mean, like, that's typically the case, man. When we learn by observation, we learn by observing others. But also, I feel sometimes that something that is misinterpreted is that there's one thing we cannot like force is learning. Learning is something that comes from yourself. I mean, you could be with a great teacher in a classroom where there is, I mean, all the tools you need, but still, if you're not interested by what's going on at that moment, no learning will occur. So I'm just saying it's not because you're hooked in a computer on a specific tool where you get it's AI assisted that learning will occur. I mean, learning is by itself something extremely individual, and having a social interactions, having scaffolding within this context is critical. And that's essentially where the human parts in learning basically is critical. It's like really the motivation comes also from the group and from the interaction with the teachers and with the peers.
Interesting. So schools are not going to disappear anytime soon, right? Because
No.
that's the place where you meet other students, you meet teachers, and where so the social learning can occur.
Yeah. And I mean, like, school is not about just the fundamental or the academic learning. So, as you say, it is also learning how to interact with others, understanding the hierarchical, I mean, the social hierarchy in a group, finding ways to move in that social hierarchy, adjusting your social behavior. So, that's not going to disappear. And I feel, I mean, like, what our society should be trying to do is precisely make sure that the school stays like something open to the rest of the world where you can like be even more so have a greater place basically, I think, rather than a weaker place in our societies. Because I mean, if we want schools to be like the lever by which we have societies that are a little bit less, where there's less inequalities, I mean, schools should be even more so at the cornerstone of our societies.
Absolutely. Schools and the teaching profession. Like
Yeah, yeah,
if we
sure.
if
I
we
mean,
continue to downgrade the teaching
yeah.
profession, we're not going to go anywhere. So yeah, fully agree on that. And what if we talk about teachers? What new or not so new anymore brain relevant skills do you believe teachers will need in a future AI centric educational system beyond, like, subject mastery, pedagogy, and class management, of course?
Well, I think, I mean, like that, and I think that's the main difficulty of teachers is that for sure those tools change a bit the positioning of a teacher in the classroom. It's not to say that they shouldn't be like sometimes just in a very kind of classical interaction with students where you really provide the knowledge that they need to acquire, but like it's also a way to more kind of engaging in a more openly discussion about what they're exposed to, how can they use like the skills needed to assess the information rather than just pushing the information. So I think they're in a complex situation now. It's just that they need to be able to engage way more into a discussion with the students on what they're exposed to, why what they were exposed to are basically facts, why are they opinions or beliefs. And I think that's a critical thing. And sometimes, I mean, I was talking to teachers lately, and essentially teachers who are teaching science, and they're more and more in a situation where it's complex because they tend to try to teach facts, and there's a lot of students that comes with their own beliefs and saying, well, I don't agree with what you're saying. But I say, well, that's the problem is also of the way we teach science. If we teach science in the same way that we teach beliefs, then you have like a problem here. If you teach science by actually insisting on the method that produced the facts, then here we can actually kind of provide way more critical thinking skills to the students, because then they can make the distinction between these different types of knowledge. So I think, yeah, there will be a change of position in the classroom, and I think we need also to teach the teachers uh, to be more engaged with their students. Like it's. I mean, sure, it's going to be a bit different, and different. It also depends of the school system, because of course, like the school system in the U.S. is not the same in France, and so forth and so on. But I mean, the critical thing is to say we need to engage more dialogue with the students, and I think even more so with AI, because they're going to be exposed to a lot of craps, and so it will be also times to make sure we can adjust basically their way of looking at the information they find online and the information they can get within the school.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's gonna be critical. Do you know of any organization that does try to bring critical thinking into schools? I mean, I guess that's the most pressing issue. Like, it can come from NGOs or non for profits or the state itself. But I mean, for me, from what I hear from our conversation, is really that critical thinking is at the core of everything, and there's really an opportunity here to have a super large impact. Um,
Well, I mean, there are a few organizations that have been like pushing for the idea that critical thinking was critical. I mean, UNESCO,
mm,
OECD have been like all advocating for the needs to develop critical thinking in learners. There are few NGO. I mean, like I know one in France where they also try to go in like low SES areas where
mm,
it's also very critical to try to foster those type of abilities. We've been running some projects on trying to foster critical thinking, especially related to false information that you can find online. So we did like large experimental studies where we try to provide materials to the teachers, and then they try to use those in the classroom. I
mm,
mean, the issue is that it seems to be short-lived. So it
mm,
works, but just for a few weeks. So the key question is how you can make sure that you can foster those skills for a longer period of time. But it
mm,
means also that we need to talk to the policymakers. So we need to have like within the curricula enough time to do that. The issue is that our educational system generally speaking, and especially in the French system, is that they are so focused on like the key academic learning and fundamentals that they are not like picking up the urgency to also rethink our educational system in light of the word that is changing at a pace that is incredible. So we really need to think a bit differently outside of the box. Like, okay, sure, we need math, but what do we need in math? So of
Mm.
course we need literacy, but what do we need in literacy in such a way that we can also have these new domains that emerge where we can really have like enough hours that the students can really pick up those skills. I mean, we cannot do that by thinking, that's the transversal skills, and if you're good with literacy and numeracy, that will be enough. Well, no, it's obviously not enough. So really need to pick up a bit like what do we teach when in such a way that we have critical thinkers. But I think also the problem is when you start to have critical thinkers within the school, you might be in a difficult place because they might start to question the way you design your school system. So I think it's also it's of course we it might be laughable, but I think from time to time, educational system are not going to push too much for critical thinking because for a society as a whole, you might be at a difficult and tough place afterward.
Hmm. Absolutely. And if we go back to how science is evolving, I have some questions around the fact that, do we know everything about how our brain learns nowadays, or are there some things that we still don't know and we might know in 20 years, 30 years time, or do we already know everything?
No, we don't know a lot. I mean, like, interestingly, what we don't know exactly is how to integrate the different level of explanations. So we do know that there are strategies that work better than others. We do know that there is neuroplasticity whenever learning is occurring. We know that motivation is key and that, well, probably because you engage a reward system and so forth and so on. So all of those things we know. But if you want to integrate all of this together, I mean, then this is where it becomes tricky, basically. We really don't know also why there is so much heterogeneity in the trajectories of learning. So we know that, for instance, the environment are playing a huge role on shaping the trajectories of brain development. But then really the key mechanism that produce those very heterogeneous trajectories of development, that's something we really don't know about, and we're not enough, basically. So I think there is plenty to discover. And the other thing is also, well, okay, learning, as we say, it is an individual process by itself. You either learn something or you don't because like you're motivated to engage in the situation. But about the teaching process by itself, like that's also where we need to learn a lot. So the brain in interactions, that is something that we're just starting to get at. So when you look at two brains, how they synchronize to produce learning and teaching from one brain to the other, I think that's something we really need to discover, and it's still really not. It's really just we're just starting to pick up this. So it doesn't mean that we need all this information to create better educational system and better learning environment. We already have plenty of information on that. But in terms of where we can be 20 years from now, I think this is where we will gain more information over time, is like how those different brains synchronize, how they interact together, and what are the best ways to produce learning in most of the learners. Again, like it's not going to be 100% of the learners, but it's still like if we can find ways to better shape basically the teaching or the learning environment, that will be something super interesting. And keeping in mind that I think our biggest problem at the moment is the educational inequalities. So how do we reduce a bit those inequalities? Because otherwise we'll be in societies where, I mean, the inequalities are so high that we create a lot of violence in the society by itself.
Absolutely. So you say environment is accounting for a lot. What about genes? What about genetics?
Oh, well,
Can they also explain why some kids learn faster, better, more efficiently than others?
well, I mean, genetics, of course, is a critical factor, or at least it explains some of the variability. But I think we need to keep in mind that when we say some, it's not one gene. It's like
Hmm.
hundreds of genes that interact with each other. So it doesn't mean that when you have an idea of this variability of the genes, you will get any pertinent information about how to teach those kids. So I think that's usually the problem when we talk to a lay audience. So they think, oh well, you say it comes from genetics, so there's nothing we can do. I mean, like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, of course, uh, how our brain is structured is in part under the influence of genes, and but the environment will have, of course, the stronger effects on how our brain are structured and shaped over the years. Because again, what we said, like they're constantly evolving because of the learning process we're involved in. Uh, and the second part is epigenetics. We know more and more that the environment basically will change the expression of the genes. So even though you might have the same genome as someone else, because of the environment you're in, you might have a different expression of those genes. So again, it's important from a fundamental point of view, and research to know what part of the genome or of the genes explain some part of the variability of the behavior. But I think from a learning or pedagogical process perspective, you don't really care about that. I mean, it's all about the environment. Sure, I mean, there are differences between people. I mean, like, some have blue eyes, some have green eyes, but that doesn't really change the way you're going to teach the blue-eyed people and the green-eyed people. So I'm just saying that it's important for the understanding of the facts that produce the variability, but not necessarily for the way we think about pedagogy and teaching.
Hmm, I see. I see. I think because it's also a myth, that people say, "Oh, the genes the genes do so much, and so we can't change anything because you you were born with these genes and you can't change them." But yes, epigenetics, and then the fact that the environment plays a bigger role. I think it's important to say it out
Yeah.
loud, because there are still some myths around the fact that
Yeah.
genes.
And, and there are actually problems because then you think I mean, there's a lot of incredible work about the idea of why are they such a gender gap in math and science, for instance. And some of the idea, and it's a colleague from NYU that proposed that, is that it's related to the concept of brilliance, basically. So in a field where you think you need to be brilliant to achieve like greatness, well, this is the field where you find the most gender gap, basically. So it's interesting because, like, you can feel that even though we're not talking about genetics, we are talking a bit about genetics because we feel that some have this basic predisposition to be very good in that specific area. And I think that's really something we need to deconstruct in the learners, because if you start to feel that there are the one who are good at math and the one who are not good at math because of some kind of predisposition, basically, then there's no way you're going to like really engage any resources in that specific field. And so I think that's really something that also play out in different types of inequality, gender, but also socioeconomic inequalities that you find in academic achievement.
Absolutely. And when we talk about these myths, these neuro myths, I mean these myths related to our brains, what are the myths that you hear most? I mean, are there some that are really persistent and that we know are false? So we can
Well,
debunk some of these.
it's interesting because sometimes they're culturally loaded depending of the educational system. But like some that you tend to bump into is like we only use 10% of our brain. So the whole idea that it's all about effort. So students wouldn't learn because they don't using enough of their brain, and that makes literally no sense. I mean, like, you're using your brain and the activity in the brain is oscillatory, but like it engaged like a very large population of neurons. So we don't use 10% of our brain. So it makes no sense to try to use 100% of our brain. I think that's one of them. Second one is having a left brain or right brain. So the idea that you're a little bit more analytical if you use your left brain, or your right brain, you're more creative. That makes no sense. But it does have an impact on the students, because that's also what we tend to think, that oh, they are the one good at science and the one good at literature. I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, like literally, I mean, you could be, if you're good at literacy, you tend to be good at any kind of literacy. So if you're reading well, it gives you an advantage to be good at science, good at math, and so forth and so on. So that's why it is important to kind of deconstruct those type of myths. One that is very prevalent in France, and I have no idea why. I mean, they are thinking that when you do coordination, motor coordination, it's actually provide an advantage for reading better. And it makes literally no sense. There is no data on that nowhere, but I think this is a very prevalent
You
myth.
mean manipulating stuff while
Yeah,
learning how to read?
for whatever reason, people think that it creates like better information transfer between the left and the right brain, and that provides like better reading ability. I mean, like nothing is related to any kind of scientific data on that. Um, I think one that you hear most at the moment is about how basically digital tools will have a super large impact on our brain, where again, like we don't really find that. I mean, it's more complex than this. Of course, it takes part of our time and this time we spent on those digital tools, but we do so many different things on those that really you cannot really assess the effect it has on our brain. So that's I think also something we need to be clear about, because the more and more I'm like discussing with the teachers, the more and more they're relating the difficulty that they have in their everyday professional life to the problem of screens, and it's actually not that related, and it's just a way to explain the difficulty they might have. But like the explanation are of course multiple and comes from multiple causes. The fact that we don't pay them enough, that we don't train them well enough, the fact that they have at least in France, too many students per classroom, that actually explain more of the difficulty that they have than just the fact that their students spend too much time on the screens.
Mm. Although that might alter their attention. We haven't talked much about attention, but I guess if you are used to social media and instant gratification, your attention might be lessen in the classroom, where you still have like 1 hour courses and you still have to
Yeah,
be seated and seated and still for 1 hour, and so I guess.
sure. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's the complexity of it. It's an open question. We don't really know why. I mean, I totally respect the observation from the teachers, and more are saying that their students have more, struggle more to be attentive or to concentrate for a longer period of time.
Mm,
But when you look at the data, it's not that obvious, basically. And
mm,
so I
mm,
think we need to reconcile the two, and also acknowledge that there are also multiple factors that explain that they are not concentrate. So it's not just because they have less attentional resources, they might have the same amount of attentional resource, but don't engage those attentional resources within the specific context. And so it speaks to different type of solution that you can propose. I'm not claiming that is not the case. I'm just saying that if you don't identify the right factors, then you might find not the correct solution to the problem that you have.
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Grégoire. We have one closing question that we ask everyone is really, who else do you think we should interview? Like, who inspires you? Who thinks about the future of education in an inspiring way that you think we should have on the podcast?
Well, I think you should try to talk to Pierre-Yves Oudeye. He's a specialist of AI, and he's using AI in a very interesting way. So he's programming bot that actually will train the way that the students think about what they're learning. And he showed that in some context, and there are very controlled contexts, you can even boost the curiosity of the students. And we
Wow.
all know that curiosity is a key factor to engaging in learning. So I think that's someone you should talk to.
Oh, I'll definitely reach out to him. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing all these insights with us. And yeah, I'll put the links to your work in the podcast notes for those who are curious to know more. Thank you so much, Grégoire.
Thanks so much.